All right, my grade 11s, welcome back after the weekend. I'm going to teach you today about the kingdom Protista. So you need to get this note from the web or from the LMS site, okay? And then just before we start, I'm not going to give you much homework, if any homework at all. So it's an easy day for you. You're just listening. And before we start, I just want to bring your attention back to this note that we looked at a few days ago. So we are finished with bacteria and archaea. We are done with the prokaryotes. Okay, so we've started diversity. We've looked at all living things. We've looked at the domain bacteria and the domain archaea, and now we are in the domain eukarya. So today, fresh week, fresh domain. Okay, and we are starting today with kingdom Protista. So my thoughts are I'm going to go through Protista with you today and fungi with you tomorrow, okay? And then we're going to take a couple days to go through plantae and a couple days to go through animalia, all right? And so then we will do eukarya together. So you are in the kingdom eukarya. These guys have a membrane-bound nucleus, so they are different than these guys, okay? And we're looking at Protista, and Protista you will find on this note. So the thing I really want you to know about Protista, it's a mixed bag of organisms that don't belong anywhere else. So there's specific criteria to be a plant, to be an animal, to be a fungus, and then to be bacteria and archaea. Protista are just all the leftovers that we don't really have another place to put. So if there's ever been a kingdom that has to be revamped and researched, this is the one, okay? So just keep that in mind as we go through, okay? Because you're going to see that it's very simple note, very simple ideas, because there's not a lot of information on Protista. So the most important thing is we are in eukarya. They are eukaryotes. All right? These guys obtain their energy in a variety of different methods. So I'm going to go over those with you today. And most are unicellular, but not all. Okay? Most are unicellular, but not all. So reproduction, again, mixed bag of everything. You can have sexual or asexual reproduction with these guys. And some of their reproductive cycles are so complex, I'm not going to make you learn them, but they're extremely complex. It's not just like making gametes like how we do, okay? In asexual reproduction, they undergo fission, like bacteria. So in other words, they're undergoing mitosis. They're just splitting, one is splitting into two. In sexual reproduction, they use gametes and produce spores. So here's a point that's a little different. What's a spore? A spore is a fertilized egg cell. Okay, so gametes, you've got a sperm and an egg, right? Not the same as ours, obviously, but if I use the comparison, you'll understand it. So the sperm and the egg come together, and then they form, with us, we would form an embryo. With these guys, what they form are spores. So a spore is a fertilized egg, okay, or a fertilized gamete that can become dormant for a long period of time. So when we make babies, the sperm and the egg meet and the baby isn't dormant. It goes through rapid mitosis very quickly and starts to become larger and larger and more complex. When these guys reproduce sexually, they make a spore, and the spore just goes somewhere else, wherever the environment might be, whether it's aquatic or whether it's air, and it remains dormant until it reaches the right conditions. So keep that in mind. They have the ability for their offspring to become dormant until the offspring reach a condition that's favorable for that offspring to live in. Okay, so Protista can be classified according to how they acquire energy, so how they get their energy. All right, you and I are heterotrophs. We have to consume. These guys can get their energy. How do they acquire their energy? They can be photosynthetic. So in other words, they can change sunlight to food, okay, much like a plant, all right? Some of the Protista can be chemiosynthetic, still autotrophs. They take chemicals and obtain their energy, okay, various different chemicals. And then you can have Protista that are heterotrophs. So some of them have to eat. So heterotrophic by ingestion. You have to take food in and digest it. This is what you and I do, all right? And so this is where I say they're a mixed bag of everything, because you can photosynthesize, you can chemiosynthesize, you can eat, okay, by putting the food inside of your body, and then they've got this different thing, which is like a fly and fungus, okay? They are heterotrophic by absorption. So what does that mean? Whatever food they want to eat, they secrete their digestive enzymes on top of it, and then digestion occurs outside of their bodies, okay? I mean, they don't really have bodies, they're cells, but you get the idea. And then once that digestion is done, they can absorb the nutrients back into their cells, okay? So I don't know if you know that a fly does that, but a fly basically will sit on your hamburger, throw its digestive enzymes outside of it on the hamburger gets digested, and then the fly sucks it back in, okay? This is what these guys do. All right, so that you have an understanding, digestion occurs outside the body once the food is in a form that it's probably liquefied in a way that they can take it back in, then they're going to go on that food and absorb it. All right, so how are we actually going to classify Protista? This is the main division in their categories. So there are 3 types of Protista, okay? This is one way they can be classified, but this is the more typical way that we're going to classify, okay? So we've got fungi-like protists. So in other words, they're protists, but they're like fungus. Notice this is a different kingdom in Eukarya. So this is again where I say they don't really fit anywhere. So we say they're fungi-like. And so an example of this will be some of your molds. Okay, so some molds, water molds particularly, not the mold on bread, but some molds like water molds are protists. So when we look at this fish is not a protist, obviously. If any of you have ever had fish, you know they're kind of difficult to care for because they get diseases easily. And this disease here, all this thread-like structure, you might think it's a mold or a fungus after I teach you about those guys, but this is actually a protist. So every one of these extensions is a protista. Okay, and the protista used the energy from the fish and it ended up killing the fish. Okay, it was living off of the fish, which, yes, I know is very sad. Okay, and then we have plant-like protists. Okay, and so many algae, you might think they're plants. Many algae are actually plant-like protists. So notice they are plant-like, but they are protista. Okay, so they don't meet the qualifications of being in the plant kingdom, which we will get to in a number of days. So plant-like protists, for instance, many algae, vary from simple one-celled forms to large multicellular organisms. So again, in this category, we're going to have a lot of variation. So you can, unfortunately, I don't have my original copy of this. You guys are just getting an uploaded picture of this note, obviously. Usually I would have a nice colorful diagram, but it's left on the hard drive at work, unfortunately. So you can't see these colors. They're actually quite nice. If you Google some of these guys, quick Google search with images, you're going to see the colors that they will be. So they vary from simple one-celled organisms to large multicellular organisms. You've got dinoflagellates, unicellular, and photosynthesize. Okay, so I'm going to get out my green here so that you can see this is why they're plant-like, because they photosynthesize. Diatoms, okay, different here. These guys photosynthesize. All right, so different shape is what I'm saying here. All right, euglenoids, euglenia, unicellular, and photosynthesize. Okay, not to make you disappointed, but if we were at school, I ordered these guys in, and you get to look at them under a microscope just for fun. So what I'm going to do is, if I can find a good video, I'm going to just post it. It'll be like maybe a 2-minute clip so that you guys get to actually see these guys swimming this semester. Okay, so because they're really kind of neat, and they're plant-like because they photosynthesize. All right, and then we have these guys here that are autotrophs. They photosynthesize. Okay. And they are red, green, and brown algae. So the difference here with the algae is that it's multicellular. Okay, so this organism is multicellular. Florida, if any of you guys happen to go down to Florida in the summer in 2018, many of your vacations might have been ruined. Maybe there's one of you. Unfortunately, I don't have you in front of me, so we can't have this conversation. But I know that last year when I taught this, I had a grade 11 student that went down to Florida and saw this red algae. So this is what happened. They had this bloom of this red algae, and I can't remember now. It's gone from my mind what they call. Oh, it's called a red tide. There it is. It's back. So what happens is this here becomes so numerous that it actually makes, and it sends off a red film, and it makes the ocean look very, very red, and you can't swim in it. So along the coastline, I can't remember what side of the coast it was. I think it was actually the west coast of Florida. They had this huge algal bloom, and they couldn't swim. So people that went down to Florida weren't able to swim because it's a severe irritant for most people's skin. All right, it's not a good thing to swim in, and that's a protist that caused that problem. Okay, so if you've got time, which you probably don't, but if you're interested, you can look that up, the red tide in Florida in 2018. All right, and lastly, we have animal-like Protista. Okay, so animal-like protists are often referred to as protozoa. So if you see the term going forward, because if you're in biology, I'm assuming that some of you are deciding that you want to go into biology next year. I know it's you need that third science for many of you guys. So some of you are sitting in the class just because you need that third science, and that's great. But many of you, I think, are going on, and when you get into university, we don't do this again in grade 12. So they're going to expect you to know these words. So understand that protozoa is an animal-like protist. Now, animal-like protists don't photosynthesize. They're animal-like. So they're heterotrophs. They have to consume. There's so much variability in this category. So they're very variable in their form. They all look different. Unlike plants, they don't have cell walls. Okay, so plant-like protists, I don't think I have that in there, but they're going to have cell walls. And these guys live in aquatic environments. So they're swimmers. Okay. And unfortunately, for a lot of animals, they are parasites. All right? Some of them are. So you get them living in aquatic environments, and they live inside the fluids of a host. So in other words, they can live inside of us. How are these animal-like protists distinguished? They are distinguished by their modes of locomotion. Okay? So the first one I'm going to show you is a paramecium, and you would definitely see parameciums or paramecia if I brought the sample in. So these guys are parameciums, and they're called ciliates. Okay, so the actual category of these animal-like protists, and they have more categories than the other divisions, is ciliates because they have cilia. Okay, and cilia are hair-like substances. So hair-like organelles. So on this outside of this, you can't see it very well, so I'm going to emphasize it. The paramecium has cilia. Now, in a good year, I would be making you know about the paramecium and the food gullet and how it eats. But basically, it does have a little gullet here, and it takes food in through that, okay? Then it digests in these food vacuoles. So just so you've heard it, all right? And they're ciliates because they have cilia that beats, and that's how they move, all right? And this here is a paramecium, all right? This is a paramecium. We've got sporozoa. So trick question usually on a test. How does a sporozoa move? It doesn't move. It's non-motile. And so you're looking at this and saying, well, there's a mosquito. Is that a sporozoa? No, absolutely not. Mosquito is an animal. When we get to Animalia, you're going to realize that. So mosquitoes transport sporozoans. Okay, so that's why I'm showing you that there. So when they go into like a pond area, these guys are swimming there, and they can suck them up. All right, and then the sporozoa lives in the mosquito. It can actually pass it on to other organisms. All right, so just so that you're aware of that, they're non-motile. And then we have our flagellates. Okay, flagellate, flagella. So we can emphasize that in the picture. All right, there's the flagellate with its flagella. It moves with a whip-like flagella. Okay, and sometimes they can have two. And Giardia is an example of a flagellate, okay? This is another example here. This is a euglena, okay? And then a sarcodine uses a pseudopod, which is known as a false foot. So in Latin, false foot. Podia refers to foot, pseudo refers to false, and it has a false foot. What is the false foot? It's these extensions here. So they're like cytoplasmic extensions. So they basically have these blobs with their cell membranes, and they send out these like suction cup types of devices. So each of these things I've just outlined would be considered a false foot. Now, keep in mind, this thing is like morphing its shape all the time. So at any time, this false foot could go in and there could be another one, another extension here. It's just sending out blobs like suction cups so it can move that way, okay? So it sticks to the bottom and it moves. And this here is an amoeba, all right? So the friendly amoeba is something that you would see frequently. I think it's in SpongeBob SquarePants. I usually hear that when I teach this lesson, but don't quote me on that because I don't watch that show. So this is an amoeba down here, all right? And that brings us to the end of our lesson. So what I'm going to ask you to do is this. Very, very easy homework, okay? What are the three, I'll say, categories of protists? Okay, sorry, I'm writing on a slant because I've got that phone in front of me on that lap. So what are the three categories of protists? So what I want you to tell me there is there are fungi-like protists, animal-like protists, and plant-like protists. Okay, so you'll take a second and write that down. And what are the differences in each group? So what am I asking you? This is what I'm asking you. Okay, so if we go back here, basically all I want you to do is review this note. Okay, I'm asking you, how are fungi-like protists different from each other? Okay, so I've just given you just two examples there. I'm not going to ask you a lot about fungi-like protists. Okay, so this is a question you really can't answer based on that. But when we get to plant-like protists, tell me how some of these guys are different. Okay, so we know that these guys photosynthesize. You can see this actually has a flagellum. Okay, so this is a euglenoid. It can photosynthesize. So I've got it in this category and I've got it in the animal-like category. We're going to keep it here because it photosynthesizes, okay? And if you can see these, and I'm going to put up a very short clip, you'd actually see that this is green inside. So when you look at these guys in color, you would see that there's chlorophyll in there. And that's why, and again, people classify it as plant-like, they classify it as animal-like. I'm just going to leave it be, okay? So I'm just going to let you know it can fall under both categories. But probably this is the best one because it's photosynthesizing. All right, so we're going to consider euglenoids to be plant-like protists. But they have a flagellum so they can move, all right? So to answer your question, these are the different types of plant-like protists. What's the difference? When we get to algae, they are multicellular. How are they the same? They're all autotrophs. Okay, so I'm answering your homework questions with you. And then when we get to animal-like protists, these guys are categorized based on how they move, okay? And so then you can finish that question up. All you're doing is telling me what are the different types of animal-like protists. We have ciliates, etc., okay? And that's it. That's all your homework.